Human struggle to raise the level of living. That's what it's all about. I'm Magnus Packle, and this is Magnus Packle GVA. I appreciate you being a part of our show. Community policing. If that means that the police will be very familiar with the community and gain their trust in combating crime and keeping the peace, we need it. There is too much conflict in Africa, and that's one of the main reasons for Africa's comparative underdevelopment. When I speak of community conflict, I'm referring to indiscipline and disorder between neighbors in the community, in the streets of the community, and between communities. The primary reason communities have indiscipline and disorder is because law enforcement is weak. In general, people respond to signals of punishment and reward. I think it is reasonable to assume that throughout the world, if not for the enforcement of law and order, a stronger person could just start into your house and walk away with your property, or even your children and loved ones, because nothing may happen to him. He could just do that. Indeed, for communities throughout the world, there is a community disorder continuum, ranging from 0% disorder to 100% disorder. It is very unlikely that people can raise healthy and productive children in a society with persistent chaos. Indeed, very little economic development will take place in communities moving toward 100% on the disorder scale. Community policing must have certain goals that include: 1, increasing the citizen satisfaction with the police in reducing disorder, and 2, assuring that the peace and harmony that prevails support optimal economic participation for the people. To be successful, community policing must have a grassroots approach that empowers police officers on the beat to have some decision-making powers while maintaining a degree of control in the community. For this to happen, there must be trust between the police officer and the community. Community trust often emanates from transparency, responsibility, and accountability in a setting of familiarity. So doesn't this mean that local or municipal policing, where people tend to know one another well, is what we need, as in many parts of the world? Or should we have state or provincial policing as a second-best solution? Can federal or national policing be tweaked and made effective in assuring community transparency and familiarity in securing trust? Can a policing system be trusted if an officer is not well known by the people, or if his supervising institution is not transparently familiar to the people? In some places, the people are afraid that the police officer can out them to the implicated criminal if they report a serious crime. This is less likely to happen if police institutions deploy officers for longer periods of time and also set up mechanisms to ensure that the objectives of law and order and improved productivity are being achieved. There is the fear, of course, that long-term police officer deployment may be used by some politicians and community leaders to intimidate their opponents. However, with appropriate controls, these possible negative results may be minimized, especially when the benefits are significant. In the final analysis, the police are extremely important. They are friends to the community and are to help in maintaining law and order, and therefore increase productivity and development. They need the support of everyone. In review today, our conclusion on stopping organized free radicals. But up next in our Hidden Economics, is it possible that 80% of government sector corruption is done by 20% of the officials? Ever heard of the 80-20 rule? In 1906, Italian economist Vilfredo Pareto created a mathematical formula to describe the unequal distribution of wealth in his country. He observed that 20% of the people owned 80% of the wealth. Quality management pioneer Dr. Joseph Joran, working in the United States in the 1940s, recognized a universal principle he called the vital few and trivial many. Since then, economists have used it to talk about the 80-20 principle, where in any situation, roughly 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people. 80% of accidents are caused by 20% of motorists. 80% of the income is contributed by 20% of the customers. 80% of the beer is drunk by 20% of beer drinkers. 80% of the crime is committed by 20% of the criminals. 80% of the good comes from 20% of the people. 80% of the bad image comes from 20% of the people. Is it then possible that in government, 80% of the corruption is done by roughly 20% of officials? Therefore, examine yourself. How important are you? Are you a part of the 20% that bring 80% of the good image? Or are you a part of the 20% of the people that commit 80% of the crime? Or even drink 80% of the beer? Think about it. Our Hidden Economics for you. Today we continue our discussion with Dr. Mohammed Ibn Chambers, Secretary General of the African, Caribbean, and Pacific Group of States, and a former president of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. Dr. Chambers is one of the most knowledgeable people on Africa, with tremendous experience in international relations.